Welcome to the In-Betwixt. Well, I'm going to try that again.
In betwixt.
Okay. 5, 4.
Seashells.
Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping leaders embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. And there he is, Josh Hugo. How are we doing today, bud?
Hey, John. I'm doing pretty well. I'm excited. You know this, but the listeners don't, that I am making my first trip back to the University of Notre Dame to watch a football game since I was a student there. And that game was nearly 19 years ago. So I
Wow.
am,
Nice.
yeah, very excited to
Yep.
get back and spend some time on campus. The game is going to be fun, but it's definitely secondary to just the experience of reconnecting to an important place.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that. And you're also going to be out
Turns
there.
out we're both going to be there, which is hilarious because we talk, dozens of times per week, probably through text or through this or through phone calls. And we didn't know about that till the last week that we would
Yeah.
both be here.
Where are
So,
you next weekend? Oh, I'm going to be at Notre Dame. Oh, me too.
yeah, how about that? So, yeah, thrilling. And I'm sure we'll run into each other. So, I'm looking forward to that. So, well, hey, I want to get into today's topic. I think we're really excited about that, but certainly want to come back to a couple things, about previous episodes and some other items. So, Josh, want to kick it over to you for getting us going on the next part.
Yeah, I mean, we actually brought this conversation up. We're now, this is our sixth episode, I
Seventh,
believe,
seventh
seventh
episode.
episode.
Yep.
So, like at any stage of developing something that, you know, this is somewhat backwards planned. Let's be very clear. Like we came into this with clarity, but I came back to this question this week with John just a few days ago, and I said, "How clear is our thesis? Like, how clear is kind of our position on what we're doing?" And I think it's always important, just kind of as a meta moment, if you will, is it's in a way coming back to your vision. It's in a way coming back to the mission, the purpose of what you're doing. And so it wasn't something like I put on my calendar and said, hey, we need to come back and make sure that we're staying focused on our vision for this podcast. But it was really just an organic bubbling up of a question of we want to make sure that as we're producing value for our listeners, that we are making the content here focused around some thematic kind of foci or focuses. So we came back and we just wanted to kind of reiterate and re-engage with this, like what is the particular push or purpose of the Leadership Limbo podcast. And what we really kind of concisely put was the ability to navigate polarities and tensions. That's the heart of effective leadership. And I think there's a little bit of a countercultural piece to this, is that there's in today's media ecosystem, in today's, the LinkedIn world, social media, is that the data would suggest this to be true, is that if you take a very clear stance on something that's an either or proposition or a versus or a controversy or something that is you're either in or out or above or below or hot or cold, any of those sort of polarities grabs attention. But I think the essence of what we're trying to communicate is that leadership is rarely, if ever, going to be an either or proposition. It is rarely, if ever, going to be you got to pick one side or the other, but it is that messy middle. It is that tension that is the essence of great leadership, is that you will have to navigate in between polarities very frequently. So, John, I want to kind of get your reactions to that as well and make sure I'm not missing anything as that was explained.
Yeah, no, and I think, in our beginning lines of this episode and our last ones, we talked about this is about navigating the in-betwixt and the in-between, about the, being in the midst of it all, about that tension, that leadership tension you feel. And so I think it fits in with that. And so it's our goal to kind of continue to highlight that, right? You think back to last week's episode, we talked about when you have a relationship with your manager and you've got to manage this idea of having autonomy and showcasing your strengths and your ability to do something, but also that you're willing to be accountable to folks. I think a lot of people in the world, when they view themselves as someone who's being managed, they are like, well, no, I'm full on autonomy. I handle things on my own. I don't need anything from anyone else. I chart my own way. While others may not say it this way, but they just say, I'm just going to sit back and take marching orders and do what I need to do, right? And so we argue neither one of those are bad. Neither extreme of that is bad. But more importantly, it's about how you navigate that middle, right? And how you lean one way or another. So this idea of I'm a systems leader and that's how I lead. I rely on systems and kind of the planning of that. And this other person says, well, I'm a relationship leader. I lean more towards my connection with others. There are people who certainly side towards one way or the other, but it's also, we believe, not a either or. It's a where's the balance for you in the middle of that, right? And so, I think we'll see more of that in today's episode for sure. But if you're going to look for one thing that we're going to provide you with, it's maybe not answers about which way to be. It's more about what are the key differences or the key tensions you're going to feel as a leader here. And
Yeah.
we want to give you ideas for how to think about it and how to maybe process through that. Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's
I
what I
love
got.
that. And I don't want to belabor this point, but I'm going to plug a really, probably one of the more intriguing books I've ever read, and one of the most difficult content. Like it's not written for easy consumption, but it's The Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman. And he talks a lot about self-differentiation. And I think that you might be listening to this and thinking, okay, well, like if you can't define who you are, like I am an authoritative leader or I am a step back and listen leader, that you don't know who you are. And I'd actually challenge that to say that no, in fact, like the ability to self-differentiate from a particular model, to say like I can see what is happening around me but also know clearly who I am in adjacence with but outside of this overall model, is actually the key to great leadership. And I think that if you get oversold on having a particular style or designation of who you are as a leader, it actually limits your ability to be impactful. It doesn't mean that you don't have your core values. It doesn't mean you don't have your clear vision. It doesn't mean you don't know who you are. But trying to fit into a mold is often kind of the way we have seen a lot of leadership models kind of present themselves. And we want our listeners to be able to say, no, it's okay to challenge that and to say that there are times in which I toggle between lots of polarities. And so maybe that's the word of the day, is toggle. Toggle.
Toggle. Yeah. A great word. And I'll say this and then I'll get us into the next part. But what you can't do then is say, I'm this way. And you look at someone who operates differently and they have built their own identity and they have figured out how to toggle between what they need. And on one hand, you define them as wrong or doing it the wrong way, or even at worst, in some cases, as like the enemy of that. Right. Um, so, it's about everyone's going through that and recognizing that in others and seeing different leadership styles, but certainly seeing that everyone's working in their own way to balance polarities that we're mentioning here. So, love that frame. I think hopefully people will see how that plays out throughout this episode as well. So, wanted to come back to last week's episode, and the homework there last week was about this really important relationship that you have with the person who manages you, right? Had a colleague on LinkedIn, Lisa Freeshow. We've mentioned her a few times. She's going to come up here again. She says when she's working with mid-level leaders, this is honestly one of the biggest things she works through, is how to navigate that relationship with your boss. So a couple things to come back to. One was this coding things with a red, yellow, green light looking sort of thing when you are looking at a project plan. So which elements of this plan, or where do I think within this plan or within my roles and responsibilities, do I have the red light, the yellow light, or the green light? If you're seeing an overabundance of red, then what do you got to do with your manager to move things more towards a green? And perhaps if you are calling for a lot of green, that might be because where you're at in your leadership journey and how your boss trusts you, but just double check yourself. Make sure there's not things that you're being blind to and kind of checking back in on with things, right? The second one was just a two-way communication audit with your manager. Scale of 1 to 10. How good are we in a different variety of ways of having good back and forth, good communication? And I want to point out what Josh said is not that it's not that you're just saying things to your boss, but how well do you think that they are hearing, processing, and understanding what you're saying as well? And so hopefully you did a little bit of that in the last week. Would love thoughts on how people have found those to be useful in the week to come. So turn it to Josh to kind of roll us into this week's episode and what we want to chat about here and give us a little framing for that as well.
Absolutely. So I'm going to throw out another book that I'll give credit to here. Great book. The 100X Leader is Steve Cockram and Jeremy Kubicek who wrote this book, but they frame the idea of leader under this Sherpa mentality. And so for those who are familiar with mountain climbing, the stories of Mount Everest, Sherpas are born in the Nepalese region and are essentially kind of their nature is to be highly acclimated climbers, and they help climbers get to the top. But there's a couple of interesting pieces of the Sherpa that we're sharing today to help us to frame the idea of leader in a slightly different way. And again, this is a little bit of the countercultural piece, but if you're not cautious and you're accidental in your leadership, it could be easy to conclude that great leaders are those who get to the top. But the Sherpa mentality is that great leaders are those who get others to the top. And so there was some interviews done with Sherpas recently by Jeremy Kubicek. Actually, he hopped on a Zoom call with some of them, and he asked the question, kind of a silly question. He said, "But like, how many times have you gotten to the summit?" And the answer from one of the Sherpas was, "I don't know how many times I've gotten to the summit," but he took off his belt and showed these notches.
Mm.
And each of those notches represented how many climbers he got to the summit of Mount Everest. And so I think that is a real small and subtle shift in the reframe, but its impact is dramatic. Is that when you think about your role as a manager, as a leader, as a supervisor, is that you're going to be most effective when you're fighting for everyone else's highest good and not just that of your own. And in fact, maybe not of your own at all. If you can be there for others to help lead them to the top, then all of a sudden you're going to see a huge shift in how people are responding to you and into the kind of culture and climate that your organization experiences. And so there's a couple of qualities of a Sherpa to kind of build on this. And then, John, I'd love for you to jump in. I think one, they know the terrain really well. Sherpas know the dangers. They go up, they set up the routes, they analyze the mountains, they're looking at the temperatures, the texture of the snow, the ice. They know which way to put the ladders over the crevasses and all of the various like nuance and detail.
They know when to go fast and when to go slow because of the conditions they're seeing.
That's right. Very attuned to the environment. And they go up beforehand and they know the route. They know the rope. They know where the ropes are going. They know what's happening. They're also not carrying up other people. They climb with, but not for. They don't like haul somebody up on their back unless they're in grave danger, in which case they may have to get them down. They're not carrying people up to the summit on their backs. They also have to know their climbers really well. They have to be able to know the traits, the strengths, the potential vulnerabilities of those who they are climbing up with, because both of them have to work in some form of symbiosis to make sure that they're both coming down from the mountain alive.
Frankly, they have to know them pretty
Yeah.
quickly. Like they have to get to know
Yes.
them pretty quickly because this is like, I assume, a one-time relationship that lasts, several days, but
Several months,
it's not like you get,
even,
or,
but yeah.
okay, but still, it's not like you get years to develop this, right?
No, no, you're right. You got to figure out, you got to really pay attention to the people that you're leading. And so Sherpas do that. They also do it with you. So again, it's not like they sit at base camp. They say, "All right, everyone, you've paid me $58,000 to climb to the summit. We got some ropes.
Here's a map.
Shoot me a message when you get up there, and I'm going to go do other leadership stuff." No, they are with the climbers, making sure that they are getting up safely. So that is a really key element. I'd ask listeners to think about, okay, where's this extended analogy going? Well, kind of picture what that means for you and your work when we get to this next part about delegation, et cetera. And the measure of success is them getting climbers to the top, not themselves. So put differently, this is kind of a way to think about the managing versus doing, but I'd even go further to say they're not only just managing, but they are effectively leading others and not just kind of doing it themselves, saying, "All right, just hop on my back, I'll take you to the top," or the flip side of saying, "Hey, I'm going to sit back and make you all do it." Like it is a real partnership of leadership. And so I would love to kind of hear your thoughts on that Sherpa mentality and that analogy, John.
Yeah, I mean, I think I even recently was in one of my, I wouldn't call it a side hustle, just one of my hustles is I'm an executive coach and work with an organization called Behavioral Essentials. And we were talking about coaching and like, how do you coach people? And, this is before Josh and I had talked it, and I haven't read 100X or leadership. What is it called? 100X leader. Anyway, yeah.
100X leader, yeah.
Yeah, 100X leader. But, I made the note that what we're doing is we're Sherpas. We're getting people to think about things and figure out things on their own. And so I think it fits in really well there. And I think the framing for today, just to get us even further into our topic for today, is it is a framing of the relationship that the Sherpa has with the people they're leading, right? I am here to help guide you. I am here to let you do the work. I am here so that at the end of this, you feel accomplished and you feel that you did it, not that someone else did it for you, right? And
Well
so
said.
that's a really key part of today. And so we're going to jump into how we're taking that extended analogy and talking today about the relationship that you as a manager have with the folks that you manage, right? And so you probably assume that a lot of the episodes of this podcast over time will be about how do you manage folks? What are some strategies around that? So we wanted to make sure that today wasn't kind of some all encompassing episode about how to manage. It is about knowing the potential tensions and polarities that occur in that relationship with people when you're managing them, right? When you're trying to build a high trust, high focused team that gets results, but also empowers people, builds connection. You know, those when you're trying to be accountable, but also build trust, there can feel like there's tensions at times. And so today we really wanted this to be about that relationship. What are the potential polarities in those relationships?
Hmm.
But more importantly, as we said earlier, how do you toggle within that, right? So
Yeah.
we're going to get into a few of these. Josh is going to get us going on a couple. This we've created polarities. It's a this versus this, but we want you to know we're not telling you have to pick one or the other. We're asking you to think about how you blend the two in any given circumstance, right? And so going to throw it to Josh to get us going on kind of one of the first ones that he and I thought about. And again, there are probably more of these that we haven't thought through and would encourage you to share those with us at some point. So Josh, get us going on the first one.
Yeah, and I love that kind of note about the verses. And again, we're going to keep coming to this polarity. What we would actually challenge you to think about is instead of saying verses, say intention with. So this first one here is the tension between how open and vulnerable, or excuse me, how open and transparent,
I think
vulnerability.
vulnerable fits in with that too. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay, yeah. But how open and transparent are you in tension with the need to also have some degree of discretion and some discipline, some self-discipline.
Perhaps
Lots of
distance. Perhaps distance, right? Yeah.
distance. Yeah.
Mhm.
Lots of different authors have talked about this. Brene Brown even brings this up in some of her work about kind of that I forget the exact concept, but like the box of confidentiality. If you overshare information with people, all of a sudden your own people aren't going to trust you because they're like, well, is this leader also saying stuff about me to other leaders when I'm not in the room? So there's a real need to kind of be aware that yes, transparency is a very valuable tool and a very valuable belief and a very valuable practice to have as a leader. And there's a certain degree in which transparency starts to move into oversharing and starts to move into a place where that attempt to be transparent might actually cause harm to your team, to yourself, to the person who you are working with. And so that tension is absolutely one to manage. And so another kind of framework is like, what is the degree of discretion and discipline that I need to be applying to these various moments within my interactions with people on the team? So, John, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting one because I think this is one of those things that if you take in enough media, especially around workplaces and workplace environments, there's an underlying kind of theme sometimes that some people in the workplace and people in power they hide the truth from folks. And so what happens is you become a manager and you're like, I don't want to be that person that hides things from folks. And so you begin to overshare, perhaps, right? Or share a lot with the idea of look how transparent and open we are. And I'm not saying, hey, we should be hiding key details from our employees and we should be not informing them and bringing them into the know and leading with rationale. What I am saying, though, is for young leaders, and I did this, the desire to keep that relationship strong and to make people feel like I'm the cool guy that is your friend and I'm telling you everything, um, can lead to actually we're sharing things that shouldn't have been shared because it takes a lot more context and understanding to get there, right? So I think this comes back to early on. We talked about I want to be your buddy, right? And that's kind of going into the next one a little bit. So I'm going to share with you everything, but shouldn't. So yeah, Josh, yeah, maybe that flows well into the next one
It
here. The
does, yeah. And just to stamp a couple of questions about your discretion, like what to share and how
Mhm.
much. You should be asking yourself these questions: what to share and how much, who am I sharing it with, and are they the right people? When to share it is now the right time. You have to constantly be playing with those tendencies in your mind about maybe some of us don't want to share anything. Well, maybe you do need to share more. And on the flip side, some of us want to overshare. So those questions. But yeah, John, you just mentioned another good one. I'm actually going to quickly kind of pass it back to you. But I think a real intention. So not a versus, like a friendship versus professional. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you can't be a friend and have a professional relationship. It's not versus like you have to pick one or the other, but those can be at tension with one another. And you had a really good comment come to you this past week to our feed, and I'd love for you to share that.
Yeah, I want to share that. I want to note one thing is that I think there's friendship, and that implies, more of like an ongoing relationship where I am your friend. There's also, I think, the tension of being friendly in my relationship with you as someone I manage versus I have to be like professional and kind of stone faced and things like that, which we would argue don't have to not coexist. There are times where, hey, we have to be pretty. This is a moment to be professional. It's about to focus on the work. This is a time where we're building connection, and then obviously we think when you do those well, they blend together as well, right? And so one of these is when actually you become a manager, but you're friends with people on the team that you've managed, and I mean true friendship, right? Because that happens probably quite a bit. You've done well on a team, you execute well, you become a great individual contributor. Someone sees something in you that they think can help lead that team well, and so you get moved into that position. Well, now you are friends with folks that you manage, right? And we've mentioned her name several times. She does a great job engaging with us, Lisa Frisha, and a leadership coach, been involved at high levels of organizations, especially in a school system world. But she had this idea of what happens when you move into that. And she had a few ideas of how do you navigate that friendship when you're now the boss. So one thing that she said is that you might simply just say, hey, before this all begins, the way we interact may change because of this new structure or stage. Let's talk about it. And understanding that that's going to occur, especially in certain settings and certain contexts. So let's go ahead and get ahead of that. So you're not going to be turned off when you see me address you in a way that felt different than how we used to talk about it, right? The second thing you might simply do is simply tell the person when you're speaking to them as the boss versus a peer or a friend, she noted, right? So this could sound like, I'm not saying this as your boss, but as a friend who is concerned, or, hey, I'm going to put my boss hat on and here and try to explain the parameters. So, and that's really key, right? For those sort of relationships and understanding that, and it just helps to be really concrete about that these two things that are in tension to each other have to exist with everyone you work with. We would argue, even if no one on your team is your friend, if all of your time is just spent in this like super professional, like lack of connection building, you're not going to have a healthy team. If the whole thing is just about, hey, we're just here to be kind to each other and be friendly, it's probably going to be hard to hold people accountable when the time comes to, right? So
Yeah.
again, you got to balance those two as a manager and see what does this mean to have a team that's friendly, has trust, and knows what it takes to make sure we're pushing each other and holding each other accountable and having healthy conflict to get to the next place that we need to when it comes to our results. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a key one there. So, thoughts on that, Josh?
No,
Additional ones?
that's great. And I
Great.
like the boss hat. If my dad's listening to this, I think back in the day, so for those listeners, I think you might know this, but my last name is Hugo. And of course, like it still is around, but Hugo Boss. So
Hmm.
there was actually a hat that had Boss on it,
Okay.
the Hugo brand. So I might need to get that hat and just pop it on my head when I need to kind of wear it. But I love the distinction, almost like the literal calling out of this hat's now coming on. I
Yeah.
got to shift gears a bit. I think that's a really helpful
Well,
suggestion. So
yeah. The other thing you need is the T-shirt that I want to make for you. That's the Hugosaurus Rex. Hugo, but turn that into a hug. So you put that on when you're being friendly, Josh. Obviously. And then Hugo boss hat when it's time to be a boss. Am I
there you
taking the right?
go.
Am I doing the
Yeah,
second one here?
I take my old license plate from high school too, which had hug in it. It was Hug 115.
I love
So
it.
yeah, so I think the boss hat though is a good transition to the next couple of tensions you navigate with the people you manage, especially in the relationship realm, is going from this decision maker intention with collaborator. And so when you move from a horizontal to a slightly vertical or heavily vertical relationship, at some point again you're going to have to call out the need to say, hey, we've been collaborating, and I think this is a really good use of a communication code to say, hey, we're collaborating right now, but I also am going to have to shift over at some point. There's going to need to be a decision made, and I'm the person to make that decision. I think there's a tendency at times, if you're accidental and kind of not aware and being intentional, that you might end up just spending a lot of time with somebody who you manage, who previously maybe was a horizontal peer in the org chart, spending time kind of having a collaborative conversation. You get to the end and no decision's been made, or both of that the other person's looking to you to say, okay, this is good, but I expect Josh to make the decision.
Yes.
I think you need to know that there are times in which it is the expectation of the relationship, it is the expectation of the person you manage, and it is frankly the expectation of just good practice that at some point a decision needs to be made. And it can't just be, what do you think? What do you think? Well, let's vote on this. Now, maybe it could be a unanimous sort of decision, sure. But a lot of the time a decision has to get made. You got to call attention to that and make that distinction clear as you navigate this particular tension between collaboration and decision making.
Well, and there's going to be times where the decision has to be a little bit quicker, and so the level of collaboration that folks may want or assume they're going to get with you, you have to know when to change that. Like, hey, we're going to have to be pretty quick about this. Give me a quick idea. Okay, I'm sorry, we've got to move in a different direction. I know you don't like that. So that's when that feels bad. The other, I just love the point here. I think often we go back to the friendship thing when we move into this, and I'm going to be super collaborative with these people because I have a friendship with them or I'm friendly with them. Eventually, some of those people are going to be turned off by your management if it's like, dude, just make a damn decision here. You know what I mean? Like, let's get going. And so that's when actually they begin to get away from, I don't need you to be my friend anymore. I actually need you to make a decision. So certainly that's one. Yeah. And I think to wrap on that, the fourth one is this being an advocate in that relationship. I'm an advocate for you as a person I'm managing versus when I'm a directive manager. Again, I think this is one where you can hear people say it's really important to be directive. You need to focus more on that. Then you see other stuff that's, what's one of those sayings that a good boss is like someone who speaks up for you in rooms that you're not in, right? That's kind of the advocate lens of this. And I agree with that. But what can happen sometimes is there is a need for an advocate who is, I'm here for you, for your next steps, for what you need, for your decisions, or for your input to be heard, for you to get credit when, you do something well. And then the moment that you end up having to say to them, look, I also have to advocate on behalf of other people in this team or on behalf of my boss or the direction of the network or organization. And so I have to tell you, we have to do it this way, even though I know you don't like that or doesn't match up with exactly where you want to go with this. And taking that time to say, I still believe in you and I'm advocating for you, but right now I'm going to be a directive manager. I'm going to direct us in the way we have to go, because not everything is about, sometimes advocating for you is telling you when something's not going to work.
That's right.
Actually, like it's, this is not just, we're not making this a parenting podcast, but I think parents out there know this, that true love, true care isn't just always promoting the idea of my child and what they want to do. Sometimes it's saying, that's not going to work. You have to do it this way. But please know, even when we start going that direction, you're still going to get chances to go in the direction you want. So the advocate, like I'm your advocate, versus the directive manager is a tension. And how, again, when to balance the two. Obviously, you want people always to feel advocated for, but you have to know when it's time to step up and say, hey, right now we can't do it the way you want. Makes sense? So yeah, that kind of, they all flow together. Josh, overall thoughts on this advocate versus directive manager frame?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good example. All of these are just about toggling, and you can't pick one or the other. You have to be able to kind of navigate these tensions, these polarities. And one thought came to mind. I think that was a really thoughtful summary of both the last couple points, John. But Bill Kurtz, a former boss of ours, colleague, had shared to me at one point. He said, Josh, people want to be led. People want to be led. And I think for early career leaders, it's important to remember that sometimes the best thing you can do is just kind of buckle up and say, hey, I've listened. I've been an advocate. I've been collaborative. And now is the time for me to make this decision. Follow me. And having that confidence to say this is where we're going, and others, like naming for yourself that others sometimes really just want to be led, right? In that sort of way. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's great. So we wanted to leave you here as we're wrapping up with a couple of questions in the form of an exercise for next week or for the week ahead. Is kind of two questions. So I want you to kind of visualize, if you're driving, if you're sitting down, like picture just two thermometers on the left and the right hand side. And the left-hand thermometer is going to be like a 1 to 10. So on that left-hand side from 1 to 10, how well are you performing? If you're putting yourself at a 9 or 10, that's fantastic. Right? So visualize, that maybe that thermometer is filled all the way to the top, or maybe you're at like a 3 right now. In contrast with, and kind of in juxtaposition to the right thermometer, which is how well are you leading performers? Put differently, how well are you leading others? If both of those are kind of similar, 7s and 7s, or 9s and 9s, or 2s and 2s, it's going to tell you a story. But the other thing to pay attention to is you self-evaluate. Is if you are doing a great job performing, I'm crushing it, I'm a 9. But how well am I leading performers? That's a 4. That should be a pretty, bright orange, maybe even red flashing light to say, if I'm responsible for leading others and I'm only doing the work myself, what does that mean for how I need to adjust? And so we would challenge you with that and a couple of maybe explanations, John, if you wanted to share, like if there is a gap, what are some of the thoughts that you would encourage people to think about?
Yeah, I think just go back to the 4 framings we have here. Like, where are you finding yourself falling between, if we go back to, friendship versus friendly relationship versus over like a very professional relationship? Are you falling at a perfect 5? Like you're balancing those too well? Or are you tending towards one way or another? Your reflection might be like, hey, I'm at a 7, which means I'm kind of towards professionalism, but actually it's where I need to be right now. And that might be okay. Or you might be like, now that I'm putting myself there, I see that's why that's causing some tension. How can I scale that back the other way? So to me, it's like put them on, the left and the right, and then see where you fall in between. And I think that's going to help you to then assess what Josh said about how am I doing in terms of, how I'm performing, but also how others are performing. Perhaps it has to do with how you're navigating this relationship tension. So,
Totally.
Yeah.
Thanks, John. Well, we're going to wrap up for today. One of the reasons that we ask you to subscribe is that it provides credibility, right? Mm-hmm. So when people are looking for podcasts and you see 5 podcasts about management, the first thing that people look to is probably how many subscribers are there. So when you do hit subscribe, it is a pragmatic and very concrete way to help us get this message out. And assuming that you believe we're credible in what we're doing, and we hope you believe that small action of just hitting subscribe makes a whole big difference for the work we're trying to do in getting these concepts and themes out to the world. So please, 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 if you're listening and you haven't yet subscribed, just, hit that one button. That's really all it takes, and it really helps us, and it helps the work we're doing get out into this world.
But also what they see is the 5-star review. So please hit that. The stars get circulation.
And the reviews and comments too. Like we want to engage with those.
Yep.
And we do read them. So please make sure that you are engaging. It's a small action that means a lot to us, but it also helps the work we're doing. So download the podcast wherever you get it. Give us a 5-star review. Leave a rating. We'd love to connect further. And please share this out. Sending it as a repost, a text to your friends who do this kind of work means a lot. Thank you so much. And until next time, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.